This is Autoline After Hours, unscripted, uncensored, unapproved. Are you a podcast kind of person? Then look for Autoline After Hours, wherever you go for your favorite podcast.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey.
Hey, Gary.
John, welcome back.
It's good to be back. Yeah, I had some time off. You crewed the show last week when I was at CES, but what we want to talk about on today's show is all about what we saw at CES.
That'd be absolutely great. And I think we got a couple of good people to help us out doing that.
We do. Let's bring them in. We've got Paul Eisenstein, the publisher of the Detroit Bureau, and we've got Chris Thomas, good colleague of mine, former CTO at BorgWarner. And Chris, you're even, do I get that right? You're working for NIO right now too?
Yeah, so I actually have my own consulting company, but I'm working a little more than 50% for NIO, helping them in their advanced engineering and setting up the next generation of electric propulsion systems.
Uh-huh. So we ought to tell the audience a little bit about NIO. So Chris, give us some flavor about what they're up to in
Yeah, so NIO's an electric vehicle company headquartered in Shanghai, but they're really a global company. They've currently produced about 250,000 electric vehicles. They're pretty high-end electric vehicles, positioned a little bit above Tesla, above Audi in the marketplace. And the big thing that they have is battery swapping. So you can pull into a battery station, and in their second generation stations, it's 2 minutes and 32 seconds. One of my friends timed it. They quote under 3 minutes, but 2 minutes, 32 seconds to get a fully recharged battery put into your vehicle. So
John's a big fan of that, the battery swapping approach.
Well, look, I think battery swapping takes care of, range anxiety and all that kind of stuff, but I'm still not convinced it's a viable business model unless you have all kinds of government subsidies behind it.
No, I think it's a great idea, but you're not going to get every manufacturer to basically standardize batteries and platform and everything else. So unless you are willing to be a company setting up a massive network of battery swap stations, that's going to be pretty much everywhere, I just don't see that taking off. We saw the one company that pioneered the idea in Israel fail. And I just think it's a great idea, Chris, and it may work in some select areas. I think it's a great idea for heavy duty trucks, but I just don't see it happening in the retail passenger car market.
Well,
but that
NIO
is really...
NIO has 1,250 battery swapping stations in China already along all the major corridors in the cities. And they launched in Norway in 2021. They've already got 25 stations as the end of last year in Norway. And they launched in Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Denmark. And they've already got swapping stations in Germany, and they're building out that network. So we'll see.
Well, yeah. Look, we're going to have your back, Chris, for a show all about NIO and what all you're doing there. But let's get into CES. And Chris, we'll just do sort of a round robin with us all here. Chris, why don't we start with you? What was the coolest thing that you saw at CES?
Well, there's a bunch of cool things. I think, first of all, let's just preface it by saying, pre-COVID, it seemed like everything was focused on autonomous vehicles. And now there's a ton of things really about the dubbing it the software-defined vehicle. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of companies, that are out there saying that they're going to be participating in the software. I'm really unsure how that's really going to play out. I think a lot of companies have tried to monetize software in the auto industry, but we'll see. Never say never, right?
That's right. Not in this industry,
right?
Maybe not in life in general.
Yeah.
So so that was the trend, but
right, the trend.
One thing where you just went, wow.
One thing. So actually, the one thing that was kind of I really saw that would amaze me was micro radar. So it's a company called Akaneer, and they have these radar that are about 3 millimeters square on a chip. So I could fit 9 of them on the end of my fingertip. Okay, they're really small. They cost a couple bucks each. They've got about a 20 to 25 foot range, and they have such sensitivity that they can measure things relatively, within a few millimeters in that range. They have the sensitivity that they can actually measure heartbeats. And so I think you're going to start seeing these on the interior of vehicles in headliners to one OEM's already doing this, replacing the seatbelt or the seat pressure sensors that are there for the seatbelts warning. They're replacing them with these radar, and they can detect if there's a child in the back seat. They can detect if it's a heavy bag sitting on the passenger seat, or if it's actually a human. Which is great, but then they also can then listen to specific frequencies, and they can detect when glass breaks, so they can use it for auto theft. They can detect pretty much anything moving inside the vehicle, and so it's also used in other industries. It's used in the sewage industry, believe it or not, where they attach these to the bottom of a manhole cover. And the radar goes down and measures the level of water that's in the sewer, and also the speed that it's moving at. So I could see these really being used in windshield washer bottle, and so you can actually detect the level of windshield washer fluid, or in an oil pan to detect the amount of oil you have. So I think there's a whole bunch of uses for this technology. And the market is just huge. It's also used in parking structures to detect when vehicles are parked in individual spaces. So that was the one that kind of wowed me the most. I think there's a couple others.
Well, hold on.
Self-cleaning cameras.
We'll get to that in a minute. Paul, what was the coolest thing that you thought that you saw at CES?
Well, let me before I get into the absolute coolest, I think what's real important, and Chris has isolated this. If you will, there were a couple of different segments to CES, and sorry about that. One of the most important things was all the sensor technology. This stuff eventually will help us with some level of autonomous driving, and I think we saw at CES that there's a pullback from the level 4 and the level 5 stuff. The stuff where you can get in the car, you can fall asleep, you can turn your seat around, it'll drive you pretty much anywhere at any time. That seems to be an area that the industry is pulling back from. So that was an important thing to see at CES. This is a bit of retrenchment or refinement where the industry is sort of settling in on level 3 autonomy. You still need a driver at least sitting behind the wheel, even if they're looking at a video or something. And you have a lot of sensor technology that will help this happen. But as Chris mentioned, could be used for all sorts of things all over the mobility industry and even outside the industry. That's pretty spectacular. Now, in terms of what I went gaga for, well, probably the same thing I'll bet, John, you did too, which was the Ram Revolution. It's a striking vehicle.
This is the full-size electric pickup that Ram's coming out with next year.
It's the prototype, and I can tell you point blank that it is not going to look like that exactly when it comes out. This design will influence later generations. It's going to look a little bit more classic when it comes out. But it shows what you can do with an electric vehicle first and foremost from the design stage. You have a pass-through, a mid-gate. Chevrolet's also doing that with their Silverado EV. But you have a mid-gate. You have a bed extender, which I don't know if it's going to make into production. And then you have a pass-through into the frunk. So you can put 18-foot lumber all the way from the back bed when it's extended through to the front. And this is perhaps one of the single most interesting developments, any design that has used the benefits of electrification to completely change the way the vehicle is laid out. Now you add other things, including, Chris, you talked about, John, Gary, the issue of software-defined vehicles. And you really take things another level across the board. The drivetrain, they're talking about a range extender, could get it to 500 miles or more, the design, the software, and so on. And so from so many different angles, it just blew me away.
All right, so let me stop you there for a minute. And Chris, being the tech guy, we keep throwing the word software-defined vehicle around as though everybody is familiar with this. Could you explain to us what that means in layman's terms for part of our audience?
I'm not sure I can.
Yeah. Good for you for saying that, Chris, because everybody I ask, okay, I want to get your definition of it. They give me a different definition. I mean, it's all kind of the same, but Gary, the way I would say it in layman's terms is you describe the car and everything it can do. The windows going up, the seats moving, the engine going on, the brakes operating, the AC coming out, you define that first in software. Then you build your electronic architecture around that, and then you build the vehicle around that. That's my understanding of it.
Okay, so what I've heard is that basically, okay, do you see my phone? And I have all of these apps on there. And so basically, Apple has built the platform, and all of these apps are built on top of that platform. So, John, your phone is different than my phone, and Chris, yours is different. Paul, yours is different than mine. And it's basically, I mean, if we take some of the other features that are not fundamental to the driving and safety of the vehicle, those are things that we get all to pick and choose as we wish. And as everybody's familiar with, that you have to update your apps, or you don't have to, but that's part of the thing. So the car would allow that.
You're right, Gary. I mean, these are software-defined cell phones. We have to remember, it wasn't all that long ago, 14, 15 years, when a smartphone didn't exist. It was a cell phone. And yes, it was also using software, but it was pretty basic. It did pretty much one function. And now the flexibility and the ability for you, as well as the supplier of the phone, Apple in our case, can change the software and do all sorts of things, introduce all sorts of functions as we go towards autonomous vehicles, where the industry, I think, Chris, you'll probably agree on this, where the industry is all excited, is the ability to use over-the-air update technology, just like your phone, to be able to send you updates for software, fix things that are causing defects and now require you to go back to the dealer, introduce new features. They may have a new safety feature or an advanced driver assistance feature, which wasn't there when the vehicle was rolled out of the factory. Now they may be able to, because there's so many sensors on board, introduce a new feature that you're going to pay for. They may be able to have subscriptions for features like BMW is doing in a couple markets, charging you to use your seat heaters. Yeah. And then, of course, if the car is autonomous, they'll be able to send you all sorts of pay for services, streaming services, to keep you occupied while you're being driven by the vehicle.
Yeah. Hey, let's get back to the Ram EV, because Chris, I had a particular question for you that I'm hoping you can answer. We know it's coming with a range extender, or at least there's been a lot of talk about it coming with a range extender. Do you know anything about this? And how do you think it would how do you think it would work?
How do I think it would work? Well, I mean, range extenders, basically the IC engine runs to charge the battery, right? I'm not sure if this is a range extender or if it's a sort of a plug-in hybrid. You probably know as much as I do, John, or maybe more.
So why would they do this? I mean, so isn't the whole beauty of the EV zero emissions, and suddenly they're saying, oh, but by the way, we have this little engine in case you want to go further?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, one of the big knocks on all these electric pickups is they don't tow very far. I mean, you destroy your range, and especially if you're towing in cold weather. And then there's just people who are worried about, range anxiety, with a work truck. And so to your point, Gary, no, it's not zero emissions, but it takes care of anybody's worries about towing and going long distances. It just takes care of that problem.
Let me step in. I got some things out of a few of the senior execs, and I'm going to be very vague about whom, because some of it did come on pure background, but I did hear more about the range extender while I was at CES. In fact, one executive told me they were expecting to mention range extension during the news conference, and they did not. So this person was a bit surprised, and he was in a position where he should have known what they were saying. So it appears to have been a last-minute decision to not mention it. Now, when I pressed some other people about it, what I was told, in line with what Gary is saying, Stellantis, I've got to stop saying FCA, they are worried that they could wind up taking hits from the environmental crowd, from the regulators, because if they have a range extender, all of a sudden people are going to say, oh, you guys aren't serious about selling EVs. You're really selling gas vehicles with a battery.
Plug-in hybrid.
Right. Well, it's different, as we all know, as Chris mentioned, how it works. But we may not see it in production, mainly because of the fear by some in management at Stellantis that they could wind up having a big backlash.
Yeah. Well, internally they refer to it as the paradigm breaker. But Chris, a big pickup like that would need a fairly substantial ICE engine in it, wouldn't it?
You could probably get away with a 150 horse engine or something. I mean, the vehicle's going to drive electrically, right? All you need to do is generate electricity.
Right.
You may even be able to get away with 100 horsepower or so, I would think, because rolling down the road as a without a trailer, you're not going to need that much energy. A pickup truck probably requires maybe 35 or 40 horsepower to roll down the road at 70 miles an hour. It's not the full wide open throttle horsepower.
So where would this be configured in the vehicle?
Good question.
That's a good question, right? Because if you look at the chassis that they had out on the floor at CES, there's no room for a range extender unless they hang it off the rear of the vehicle, behind the rear axle. But then you got, cooling.
So a trailer while you trailer?
No, not on a trailer. But, my suspicion is that it would be a rear drive truck only. They would remove the front electric motor and package an ICE engine there. That's my guess. But enough RAM already. We talked a lot about that. So I'm going to throw out the coolest thing that I found at CES. And that's a company out of Toronto, a startup called Eleap Power. The letter leap, like leaping over the fence or leap year. So it's Eleap Power. And they figured out, in fact, I think, Seamus, you got a picture of that you can bring up there. They figured out how to get rid of the onboard charger of every electric vehicle and replace it with this box that uses the windings in the electric traction motor of an EV to do AC to DC and DC to AC conversion. So you get rid of a big lump of expensive heavy lump of an onboard charger. And this is what I thought was also interesting, you triple the charging speeds. Even if you're using a 110 outlet, it will now charge 3 times faster than before. Chery, the Chinese company, is going to be putting them in last mile delivery vans this year. They're planning to make about 50,000 of them. But, to me, depending on the application, I suppose, but this could be a game changer for electrics.
But John, isn't the inverter the thing that changes the AC to DC?
It is.
Back to AC.
I don't know enough to go into any in-depth, but maybe Chris can.
Yeah, the inverter takes the DC of the battery and makes AC.
Right.
And it does use the and then puts it through the motor. What the concept that they're talking about though is what's actually being done. Hyundai has a patent out where they're allowing you to go to a 400 volt charging system and they basically split the current. Half of it goes through the electric motor, and half of it goes through the normal onboard charger. And they use the normal 400 volt. If it's a 400 volt charger or outlet, they use the 400 volt charger. If it's but they want 800 volts, so they split it and put half through the motor and half through the onboard charger, and that way you can actually get an 800 volt charge on an 800 volt battery system.
So that's how they're doing their 800 volt system. I didn't realize that they were doing a split.
Yeah. So it's kind of a really novel way of doing things. So there's a lot of really small details, and there's really great technology and really innovation, a lot of innovation out there. And so.
So Chris, is Hyundai doing this now, or they just have the?
I don't know if it's in production, but they filed patents on it, and there's been quite a few other companies that have filed similar patents to again use the traction motor as a booster to boost the voltage up to 800 volts to charge the battery system.
My understanding is they are using it. I just didn't know the system, because if you look at the Kia, the Genesis, and the Hyundai products out there, they're very fast charging. Sometimes as little as 20 minutes to do 80%, and they are talking about being able to run the charging at 800 volts. So, Chris, I think that's the system you're talking about.
Yeah, could be.
But Chris, could you have a system that is without this split that would just take 800 volts?
Well, the problem then is you can't plug into a 400 volt charger, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of the infrastructure is basically 400 volt infrastructure.
Well, the 350 kilowatt chargers are 800 volt, aren't they?
Well, they're DC fast charge, so they're going direct DC. So you skip the onboard charger altogether, right? They're basically doing DC directly to the battery. We're talking about having the AC systems.
I got you.
Yeah. Okay, Chris, back to you. What else did you see at CES that you liked?
So I think again, maybe it's in a little some of the details, but I think American Axle, they have their new e-beam or beam e-axle, I think they called it. I don't know if Seamus has the picture, but this I thought has a bunch of really cool technologies in it. And so the first thing is in the transmission on the left side there, you see dual intermediate shafts. And by having two intermediate shafts, they end up splitting the torque that's going into coming out of the electric motor, going into the two different shafts, which means that the width of those helical gears that you see is half the width that it would have to be if you just had one shaft. And then again, on the left side, you see where the intermediate shaft actually drives the next gear. That again is half the width. So when you start talking about the length of the powertrain, that little thing, it makes it a little bit wider, but it's within the shadow of the electric motor. So the gearbox really is about the same size, but it's actually a lot shorter in length. So I thought this was a really clever, little innovation. And actually, if you look at it from the end, those two gears and sort of the big gear, it looks like a Mickey Mouse. So these guys,
Mickey Mouse ears.
They look like Mickey Mouse ears. So it's nicknamed the Topolino, which is little mouse in Italian. I think the next cool feature is really over on that right side where you see the oil-cooled power electronics. So they use oil, the same oil that's in the gearbox, and the same oil that's to cool the power electronics and cool the motor. Okay, and it runs through that oil cooler, and you think, well, those chips that they've got on the right side, what happens if you have a little fragment of metal coming off those gears that go into and actually touch the feet on those chips, right? I mean, it could be disastrous. But the reality is, we've had the same issue in automatic transmissions for the last 50 years. Right? Automatic transmissions have a fluid that runs with the gears, and it also runs through the wet clutches. And wet clutches, I don't know how much you know about them, but they're actually paper. It's paper on a clutch plate. And if you get any metal on that paper, it tears the paper. So we've had those cleanliness issues in automatic transmissions for years. And these guys have just applied that same technology to be able to use oil to now spray directly onto those chips. And they're silicon carbide, and they're using what's known in the industry as a T027. It's like a standardized chip, and it allows them to go to 8 or 10 different suppliers and get the same chip as the prices move around. And I can tell you, silicon carbide, I've been in a bunch of silicon carbide plants in the last 6 months, and silicon carbide is at a premium. All the silicon carbide volume is essentially spoken for the next 3 or 4 years. And people are building plants, but you got to go build the furnaces to grow the silicon carbide, and then have extra etching to split the dies off into wafers and everything. It's just there's a ton of infrastructure that's going to be required there, and I'm telling you, there's going to be a shortage of silicon carbide. So
Chris, what is the advantage of this to the OEM? Is it a packaging and efficiency issue?
Yeah, so there's a great packaging benefit because the power electronics are right on the end cap of the motor. The bus bars, as you normally talk about, are about an inch long, right? They're really short, if you could even call them bus bars. But because the oil's cooling those chips directly, you get the heat out of those chips when you're really working them, which means that your continuous power numbers are much higher than normal. And this E-beam axle, I think, was rated at 425 kilowatts peak and 250 or so, I think it was, continuous. Maybe it was even a bit higher than that. But it was again, a pretty novel technology. Some engineers are just doing some really good innovations.
Chris, isn't Mercedes already using this?
No.
Or am I confusing that with another application from American Axle?
American Axle has a much smaller version of this that they're selling to REE, the company REE that makes the Israeli company that makes the skateboards.
Wheel motors.
Well, it's not really a wheel motor. It's a motor that's mounted on a wheel corner that drives the wheel. So it's not actually in the wheel. It's at the corner, and they have these removable corners that can be replaced. And all the steering and everything is in the corner as well.
So when we talk about E-beam axles, I mean, didn't they show at CES their version of that?
Yeah, they showed it at the Detroit Auto Show too. So there's a couple of them around. I think this one's because of that transmission design and the power electronics, it's much more compact than what you saw over at Magna. But,
yeah, I should mention, following up on what Chris is saying about the shortage coming of silicon carbide, you're going to see everybody move that way. I remember talking to some of the power electronic people over at GM when I got a backgrounder on the Lyric. They were saying they're going to stick with regular silicon for a while, but silicon carbide handles higher power. There's a bunch of advantages for charging, for performance, and so on. So yeah, you're seeing everybody suddenly say they want to go to silicon carbide. But Chris, you're absolutely right. They're going to find out that it's going to take a while to build up the capacity, and it's been a tough material to work with. The failure rate out of the furnaces has been much higher. I think they're learning a lot. They're learning how to drive down costs, but for a while it's going to be a challenge. Now, if I can tell you, John and Gary, what I got a kick out of at CES on the goofy
hold on.
side.
Wait, hold that, because we got to take a quick commercial break.
Okay.
So we're building up the anticipation here, Paul, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Better be a big goof, Paul.
How do Bridgestone tires stop shorter on wet roads? It's their HydroTrack technology. But you don't have to know how the science works, just where the brake is. What really matters is their Bridgestone.
All right, we're back and waiting with bated breath to hear what Paul's got to say.
Well, to me, the goofiest, but in some ways the most fun stuff I saw at CES were the color changing cars, and one manufacturer has gotten a lot of play. That's BMW for its iVision D, though VW also showed the ability to change colors with a technology that'll probably be less likely, if ever, to make it into production. So what you had a camouflage, quote unquote, camouflage version of the ID7, the big electric sedan.
What's the deal with that? I mean, why would you debut a car that's camouflage and talk about how sleek looking it is and all that, and have it all covered up?
They're revealing it later this quarter. That's why they showed it like this.
Yeah, they didn't want to go quite all the way. Plus, they also want to show off a few technologies, including this electroluminescent paint. It's a pretty interesting idea. It's 40 layers of paint, with one of the layers being an electroluminescent material. So they can potentially let you change colors and do all sorts of things with the paint color. The drawback, which is why I don't think it'll make it into production, is that it does draw power the entire time that you are making it show color.
I'll tell you another reason it won't go into production, not on a mass market car. 40 layers of paint.
Yeah.
You know how expensive that is?
Oh, yeah, but there are people who would spend it. Let's be serious.
True.
There's some folks that would love to be able to have their car roll down the road and do all sorts of goofy things with colors and patterns and messages. So they would pay for it. Now, the technology that would seem to be at least a little more realistic from an energy standpoint is on the iVision D, which is a concept vehicle that we saw from BMW. And this is a really interesting prototype. It gets back to what we talked earlier, heavy emphasis on software-defined vehicles. It has an AI system inside. I don't know if you have any pics from that, but you can have it using a virtual reality system take you as you're inside the vehicle, and as you're looking out through these windows that can be transparent or turn into video screens, it can take cars and trucks driving by and transform them into flowers or dinosaurs, especially when you're in autonomous mode. And the colors, you can put things on the windows from the outside. But the body itself uses the latest version of a technology many of us are familiar with called e-ink. Where do you know it from? Well, the Kindle reader, for example. It's a really cool technology. It uses little micro bubbles of ink in the material. And when you apply a current for a very brief period, it will go either black or white in the early form. And they had it last year at CES in its concept called the iX Flow. This year, they brought it back with an updated version of the e-ink, and it can change to any of 32 different colors.
And then plus it has you have the opportunity to have different colors on the same body panels. So it isn't
exactly
like you just don't, like today you have a green car and tomorrow you have a red car, and this can be, you have a red, green, purple, yellow car all at once.
Exactly. I think they divided it up, if I recall, into 256 zones. And one of the coolest things were what they did with the hubcaps. And it was basically a hubcap on those wheels. And they could go into spinning colors, looking something like almost an iridescent roulette wheel.
That's cool. Okay, I've got one. Or Gary, how about you? I mean, you weren't at the show, but you don't have to be at the show to learn what's going on.
Well, so I want to ask you guys something. I want to ask you, and this sort of goes back to the original thing when Chris was talking about the opportunity to basically have an array of sensors. And it occurred to me that one of the features of the Sony Honda Mobility Afeela was 45 sensors on the exterior of that vehicle. And so two things. One, I'd like to get you guys' reaction to that vehicle. Two, John, I want you to explain to me why Sony is getting into the auto industry. And 3, Chris, I'd like you to explain to me how companies can take all of these sensors and make them work together, whether it's the 45 in the exterior or, you know, this multitude on the interior that you're talking about. So each have your assignments.
I will say this, getting back to my last comment about the goofy stuff at CES. The goofiest thing out of CES was naming a brand Afila. I feel it, the earth move under my feet. I feel it, the drugs kicking in. I feel it, they made a big mistake.
Yeah.
I just don't feel that it's a very good name for a car brand.
I agree with that. And
Yeah.
and why Sony would get into it, you know, look, if you have to go back almost to the 80s, maybe the 90s, when Sony still resonated as a tech brand. Boy, have they lost that. And, you know,
Yeah.
they need to rejuvenate themselves. And everybody's so interested in autonomous cars and people doing more things as the car drives autonomously that's why I think it's getting involved. I think it can play, it believes it can play a role in that.
Well,
But
I think they're
we'll see if
really
it
going off
does.
the model that's, you know, that LG kind of set, right? LG kind of looked a few years ago and realized that there's a big opportunity in electric vehicles, and they ended up partnering up with GM, and GM really, I would say, taught them how to make electric motors and transmissions and power electronics for electric vehicles. And they, you know, they brought the battery side of things. But I think Sony's probably looking at that and saying, boy, it makes sense for us too, right? We can bring a lot of our you know, core competencies into that space and make some money at it.
well, you just hit it. Let me, instead of Seamus, I'll add the graphics for this. That's why they're doing it. Okay.
That's how Paul rolls. Paul's got Benjamins all over the place.
Yeah, don't I wish. I just happened to get one at the bank. And that'll be gone very quickly. But think about this. Mary Barra said last year that she expects to make as much as $150 a month in software-defined vehicle hardware and software. Tavares repeated this during a roundtable at CES. They expect that by the end of the decade, they could be making as much as 20 billion euros a year from software-defined vehicles. Now, Sony, well, guess what? They happen to own a significant array of software companies, software content providing companies. They've got Epic Games, so they want to be able to have you play your PlayStation games in the vehicle. They own Sony Films. They own tons of television rights. They think that they can get all that delivered to you, and you are going to become, as a driver, part of the biggest source of revenue that they generate from all of their content subsidiaries.
So does anybody think that anybody wants another subscription for something?
Yeah, no.
Not me. Not
See,
me.
I mean, and that's the thing. And you know, and the aforementioned Mr. Tavares also gave a presentation at CES where he pointed out that the price or the cost of manufacturing an electric vehicle is such that it makes it a very expensive thing for people to buy, and that unless they're able to do something about bringing the cost down and the price down, that, you know, he was talking about, you know, the perhaps need to close factories because they won't be building as many cars.
Well, look, that perfectly serves up the next thing that I want to talk about, which is bi-directional DC fast chargers. So there's a company that BorgWarner bought called Rhombus Power out of San Diego. Mm-hmm. And they make, I was floored to learn this, they make DC fast chargers in Dearborn, Michigan at an old Ford facility. But anyway, here's what really caught my eye. They worked with 2 school districts, one in Massachusetts and one in Vermont, during the summer, because school buses are, for all practical purposes, they're just sitting there doing nothing all summer long. So they bought electricity and charged the buses at low demand when it was cheap. And then they sold the electricity back at high prices when demand was high. And they made $10,000 per bus. And so that floored me. I had no idea you could make that kind of money on it. So here, school buses are the perfect application because, they're in use 2 to 3 hours a day max, and then they're just sitting around doing nothing.
Well, they're sitting around charging, right, for a good portion of the time.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, but, when you come to the high cost of EVs, I mean, crikey, if you can make 10 grand a bus, in a summer, I don't know what you could do for a year. And, school buses, they keep them around at least 10 years. So there's $100,000 that you can earn off it.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite that. I mean, sure, over the summer, the buses are sitting there doing nothing. But when they're actually driving kids in the morning and then going back to the depot and then needing to charge and then driving again in the afternoon, I don't know how much opportunity there is to really do it during the school year. Mm-hmm. Weekends and holidays, yeah, absolutely.
I'm not sure they need to charge during the day, depending on the power of the pack. It's like a lot of the new vans, electric vans. They get 100 miles or so per charge, but typically they're only using about 60 to 70 miles during the day. Even in cold weather, they have enough on charge for the day. So if you can do some planning, charge it off peak, and even we're now going over to a time of day rate in Michigan. They could even then, by 9 o'clock during the morning, you could start recharging your batteries in the bus, and then during that peak period, 3 to 7, if we do hit during the summer an overload, they'd still be available to charge. There's a company called Parkway, which is one of the largest parking lots owners in North America. And they are looking at creating smart systems in their facilities. The same sort of thing. They use a distributed load technology where they can adjust depending on how much power they can put into the parking lot. So they'll distribute it and may adjust how fast you can charge any particular vehicle that's plugged in at a time. But the system that they're working on will also have this vehicle to load capability. And going forward, a lot of cars you're going to be able to set up with your next generation Lightning or Buick or whatever, where you'll be able to authorize when you're plugged in, being able to provide back into the grid X amount of power. You may only allow the battery to go down to say 60%, but you could do that when the grid is asking for power, and you'll get paid. And then later on, you may get recharged, and you'll pay back some of the money for the energy, but you'll pay at a lower rate, so you can turn a profit. I think this is going to become one of the keys to having a smart grid going forward.
So isn't this basically what?
Sorry, you have to keep in mind the efficiencies. You lose the amount of energy you comes out of the wall. You don't get all of that in the battery. There's efficiency losses, and there's efficiency losses coming back out. So and then the actual chemistry inside the battery. So you're going to need to make 30 or 40% on just to break even, right?
Mm-hmm. No question. Right. But it's a way that going forward, the grid will be able to have a little bit more flexibility. And I think you combine that with second life batteries that we're going to start seeing in some cases at plants, businesses, and even in neighborhoods. Heck, I live in a DTE neighborhood, and I'd love to have a second life battery shed up my block where when we get one of our regular blackouts, even if it's for a few minutes, old car batteries are going to keep me going.
So Paul, isn't what you're talking basically the announcement that General Motors, Ford, and Google made, where it'd be the virtual power plant that they're talking about, organizing to do this? John shaking his head, so he knows about this.
No, you're right, Gary.
Yeah, John, go into it, because I think you may know more about this particular
Well, no,
project
Gary,
than
you
I
pick
do.
it up.
Well, so basically, I mean, it gets back to this thought of, they want to be good corporate citizens, and then they realize that, you have this issue in terms of, one of the things that doesn't get elevated perhaps enough is, when in California, where there are these periodic, don't use the energy, don't turn on your air conditioner in your house, don't use this energy because the grid is being overloaded. And so basically what, where's Google headquartered? Oh, that's right, California. And where does General Motors and Ford want to have greater visibility? California. So basically by, utilizing, as you say, Paul, this onboard energy that isn't necessarily being used by a vehicle when the grid needs it, then perhaps they'll be able to even out some of this, peak and valley situation with the grid. Because let's face it, we all say smart grid, but we also say software defined vehicles, but we don't know what the hell it means.
Yeah.
And basically, near as I can tell, I mean, in your example there, in your neighborhood or in my neighborhood, it sure as hell isn't very smart because it sure goes down a lot.
Yeah, and Gary, I mean, I think all of us living in DTE land have this last year received the notifications telling us that they'll pay us $1.50 a kilowatt hour that we reduce demand or something to that effect during these overload periods during the summer. I just got a note from DTE a couple weeks ago that said I saved about $75 this past year since they started that program, just by reducing my energy consumption during peak hours. Now, whether it be using my car to send the energy into my house during a period of high demand, or taking the energy out of the car and pumping it back into the grid, or having second life batteries in some shed in my neighborhood where it can keep enough energy going into the neighborhood, either with a brownout or a blackout. I mean, this is one of the many things that will be an offshoot of the electrification of the automobile.
Okay, back to CES. Chris, what's next on your list?
There was a really cool, it was a small Taiwanese company called HPB, and they had a self-cleaning camera for your backup camera.
Oh,
and I don't know if Seamus can pull up the video, but I took a little video of this, and they have two cameras where it's actually simulated rain. And if you watch the one on the left, after it finishes raining, you see a little what looks like a little couple little puffs there.
Yeah, run that clip again. Yeah.
Oh.
And so basically they vibrate the camera fast enough that it breaks up the water molecules, and they basically get shut off. Seamus, I don't know if you've got the picture of the of what it looks like through those two cameras after it's cleaned. If you can bring that one up. But it was amazing. And even with salt spray that you get it here in Michigan, it's wet when it gets on there, and if you can clean it off before the water evaporates to leave the salt on there, it's going to keep your cameras cleaner. So this is, I thought, a great little novel technology. So that's the difference between the one on the left is the one with the cleaning. The one on the right is with the water droplets sitting on it.
So how does the camera vibrate? I mean, what makes that happen?
Yeah.
So they actually wouldn't tell me. I'm assuming it's a piezoelectric stack that vibrates, but it's at the right frequency to make water come off. They did say they've got a patent. You can actually see in the lower right there that they've got a couple patents. I just haven't had the time to go through and pull them and read what they say. But
yeah, no, this is really cool. And at last year, 2022 CES, I saw a British company that was using acoustics to clean camera lenses and sensor lenses. I almost wonder if this is something along those lines. Yeah. But I love it because you don't need like a little reservoir bottle, with a jet spray on it. You don't need a wiper on it that over time could degrade the lens. This kind of stuff is perfect for autonomous taxis, autonomous fleet vehicles where everybody's worried about how are you going to keep the sensors clean.
Well,
Right.
when you're talking the Sony vehicle with 42 sensors,
Yeah.
that's a lot of sensors to even ask the individual
Right.
owner to be walking around and cleaning.
All right.
How many?
Windex.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Paul, you got something else you saw at the show that?
I think we've touched on some of the key stuff.
Okay.
I guess
look,
I'll throw another one out there. Then.
Yeah, dude,
Yeah.
go ahead, Chris.
One that was kind of shocked me was TOG, TOGG.
Yeah, what was that? I saw that name around.
It was the biggest display in the West Hall, which was the Automotive Hall, and you walk up to it and you have no idea what the heck it is. From there's nothing there that tells you what they do, except they're giving away Turkish coffee and these Turkish dates. You know,
and what does it do?
TOG is actually a Turkish electric vehicle company.
Oh.
But again, the display was probably 120 feet or 150 feet by 50 feet. It was the biggest display in the whole hall, and they didn't have anything on that telling you what they did.
So let me give you the counterpoint to that, which was Project Aero that the Canadian auto industry has put together, and they developed an all-electric SUV, completely done in Canada, every little bit of it. In fact, that Eleap Power that I talked about, where you get rid of the onboard charger, that's part of Project Aero. They also have an all-glass roof that's transparent, but it also doubles as a photovoltaic panel. And I mean, this thing is just chock full of technology. So whereas TOG is talking about an all Turkish vehicle, the Canadians actually had a running model on their stand.
Right, but the Turkish guys didn't even have a vehicle. There was no pictures of vehicles. There were no, didn't even know. You had to go Google it to figure out what they did.
Yeah.
How was the coffee?
I'd heard the name as well.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that did catch me was, Chris, you just mentioned the West Hall being the automotive hall. The West Hall is, I believe, bigger than Detroit's Kobo or whatever it is called this year. It is absolutely massive, and it was all mobility. Let's use the correct term, because we had farm instruments there. We had people talking about flying vehicles and so on, and automotive or mobility spilled out. So there was mobility. One of the most quirky things and potentially interesting was the Ital design Climb E, which was a concept that had a split between a skid, an electric skateboard basically, and an upper vehicle that could be split off, could go up an elevator and become part of your home. And that was over in the central hall. And there were things outside of center. There were displays, vehicles, including the ID7. There were other things in the north hall. So what to me was the most fascinating from a broader perspective was that CES, which used to be cameras, speakers, TVs, appliances, drones, as recently as 5 years ago, automotive was an afterthought. Today, the single largest portion of the show was automotive. Huge. It took over the biggest hall and portions of all the other displays, and then spilled out into how many other hotels? The Venetian, the Palms, and all the other hotels all over town. CES is almost now really an auto show that also happens to have other consumer electronics.
Look, I call it the best car show in the world.
Okay, but Paul, cars and equipment from John Deere are bigger than television sets.
Yeah.
Therefore, you've got bigger needs in terms of real estate for the auto industry.
True, but if you looked at the size of some of the displays that Sony and some of the others have traditionally had, I mean, they're massive. Some of the displays the automotive guys, Samsung, LG, Sony, and others have traditionally had, were bigger than some of the big displays that you would see at a Detroit auto show or the like. And
Right.
a lot of them pared back.
Okay,
And part of it is there wasn't as much breakthrough consumer electronics as there was in the past.
Yeah. Right.
All right, I want to ask you guys a quick question. None of you guys have talked about this. I've seen the pictures of it. I thought it looked cool in the Peugeot Inception concept vehicle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, why has nobody said anything about this?
Well, because these guys keep talking too much. No, there's this, and do you guys got the pictures of the seats?
These are weird.
These are totally weird. So they're, they broke the paradigm in what a seat's supposed to look like.
Yeah, well,
They're very angular, very triangular. They're very square. But here's the big thing: they're inflatable. So you sit in the seat and you pump it up around you so that it holds you nice and snug. And supposedly it's safer and obviously a lot lighter.
show the steering wheel if you can.
Yeah, I don't think we have a shot of the steering wheel.
The steering wheel is basically this weird tablet with 4 little holes in it. I still haven't fully figured out exactly how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, what struck me about seeing the vehicle, especially seeing it live, it looks like a sedan version of a Cybertruck, right? All these flat angles and so.
Yeah. Okay, we're getting down to the very end. Chris, you got another one?
Well, you and I talked about it. Comma AI.
Yeah.
That was one that I haven't seen before, but I think they've been around a little bit. Basically, they take something that's about the size of your cell phone, and they mount it up on the windshield, and they have a jumper that jumps into your ADAS camera, and it gets on the vehicle's bus, the CAN bus, and essentially they take you to a level 2+ system. Now the vehicle has to have lane departure and lane centering, and it has to have active cruise control. But they basically take your vehicle up to be Tesla-like in the autopilot. So I thought that was, and for $1,500 you upgrade your car. So you start thinking about, if GM's going to try and sell you a subscription of $100 a month for these software features, you're going to get some of these startup companies that are going to come along and say, well, we'll just sell it to you for $1,500 and be done, right? So there's going to be competition in this market.
Yeah.
The key thing that's even for something as complicated as level 2 autonomous vehicles.
Right. So I'm going to squeeze in a couple of quick ones here. ZF showed heated seat belts, which I thought was very clever. It's something that I had thought about years ago myself, but I don't know how to do this stuff. And it's especially good for an electric car. You don't want to heat the whole cabin. It uses so much energy. You've got a heated seat, which is good. A lot of cars these days have a heated steering wheel, but the cherry on the cake here is having heated seat belts that get up to 104 degrees, and same buckle, same pretensioner. You just put in the different belt and you're ready to go. And then another one, I think we got a picture of this. Gentech showed a dimmable sun visor, which I really liked, because here we go. And, for those of us who live in the northern hemisphere, the northern part of the northern hemisphere, the sun is so low in the sky right now that I'm finding that the visor doesn't come down low enough, to block the sun out, or the visor is blocking my view and I'm still getting blinded by the sun. And so I love this idea of that you can have a transparent visor that will darken, just like a pair of glasses might darken, or your mirror will darken. And I thought that was pretty clever too.
Yeah, that was clever. And you can actually adjust it. You can see it on the dashboard in that picture. There's sort of sliders in the heads-up or in the infotainment system that you can slide up and down and change the dimmable feature of the.
Make it darker or lighter to your taste. Right.
You're going to see that technology in a lot of different ways. One of the cool things that's happening right now is so many of the electric vehicles are taking glass to a new level. The Lucid, the glass roof goes almost halfway back on the vehicle, and so many others. And so to have this electrochromatic glass that you'll be able to adjust whether it's transparent or not, without having to have, say, a traditional fabric roof slide in place, I think you're going to see more and more of that.
Right.
And by the way, one of the things I thought was cool, you're seeing brand extension in some of the safety and security areas. One of the ones that I actually would think about, the folks who make Ring, the safety cameras, the doorbell cameras, they now have one. They showed at CES, which you'll be able to get in your car. So it would give you an alert if it sees somebody lurking around your vehicle. It'll use some of the same security features that it has for your home, whether it's a camera or a doorbell, and alert you in case somebody is, shall we say, getting a little too close for comfort.
Yeah. Yeah. Tesla's done that for a number of years. I think Lucid's got it as well. But yeah, that's interesting that Ring's getting in on it as well.
Makes a lot of sense for that.
Yeah. Look, we're at the top of the hour. I know Chris and I have a longer list, but I think it's probably a good time to wrap up the show here. So, okay. Paul, thanks for joining us. Great to have you on board. Chris, we're going to have to do another show and talk a whole lot more about NIO in the near future.
I'd love to. Thanks for having me today, John.
Yeah, you bet. You bet.
And we should point out, John, you mentioned Project Aero. Next week's show, it's going to be all about Project Aero. So if people are interested in the development of a new vehicle from the ground up.
And just to hype that show a little bit, I heard about Project Aero a little over a year ago. Nobody would tell me anything about it. It's all been very, very hush hush. So they sprang it at CES, and that's what next week's show is all about.
Cool.
Okay, you guys. Okay. Thanks much, and thanks everybody for having tuned in.
Great to be with you.
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires. Solutions for your journey.
If you like this program and would like to learn more about the automotive industry, check out our website at autoline.tv or look for us on YouTube on the AutoLine channel.